The fatal mistake. The Xyrelian soldiers landed on the small colony world of Haven 3 with a sense of superiority. Their commander, General Vector, barely looked at the frightened human settlers as he stepped out of his transport. To the Xyrelian Empire, humans were insignificant, a species that had recently joined the galactic stage. They had no empire, no long history of conquest, and no powerful fleets. The Xyrelians saw them as weak, emotional creatures, useful only as laborers in the Empire's ever-growing expansion. Vector had come to Haven 3 to send a message. The humans had protested against the high taxes and strict laws imposed by the Xyrelians. A few settlers had even refused to obey. Such defiance, no matter how small, could not be tolerated. The Empire's rule was absolute. As the soldiers marched through the colony square, the humans stood in silence. They had no weapons, no way to resist, but their defiance was in their eyes. Vector hated it. He wanted to see fear, not anger. Then a child stepped forward. A young human girl, no older than 7, stood in front of the crowd. Her small hands were clenched into fists, and her eyes burned with something that Vector did not expect: defiance. "You are monsters," she shouted at the Xyrelian soldiers. "Leave us alone." The crowd gasped. Parents reached out, trying to pull the girl back, but it was too late. Vector narrowed his eyes. He could not allow such disrespect, even from a child. If he let this go unanswered, the humans might think they could challenge the Empire. He raised his hand, and a Xyrelian soldier stepped forward, his plasma rifle humming with deadly energy. "No," a woman screamed, breaking from the crowd. It was the child's mother, Ambassador Lillian Carter. She pushed past the stunned settlers, her face pale with terror. "She's just a child." Vector ignored her. The Xyrelian Empire had a rule: disobedience must be crushed immediately. The soldier pulled the trigger. A single plasma shot echoed through the colony square. The little girl fell. For a moment, the world went silent. The humans stood frozen, their faces filled with shock and horror. Lillian Carter dropped to her knees, cradling her daughter's lifeless body. A scream tore from her throat, a sound so full of grief and rage that even the Xyrelian soldiers hesitated. Then Vector turned to his troops. "Let this be a warning," he said coldly. "The Empire does not tolerate defiance." He turned and walked away, believing the matter was over. The humans had been put in their place. But he was wrong. Lillian Carter was not just a grieving mother. She was a Terran diplomat, and her husband was a high-ranking officer in Earth's military. With trembling hands, she activated a small holo-communicator hidden in her sleeve. The message was short: "They killed my daughter. No more negotiations. Tell Earth." The signal flashed through hyperspace, reaching Earth within minutes. Far away, in the heart of the United Terran Council, the message was received. In a dark war room, Admiral Alexander Drake watched the transmission. He saw the lifeless body of the child. He heard Lillian scream, and something inside him turned to steel. He turned to his officers and spoke just one word: "Mobilize." Across the solar system, alarms blared. Warships powered up. Soldiers prepared for battle. Earth had been silent for too long. The Xyrelians had made a fatal mistake, and now they would learn what it meant to provoke humanity's wrath. The message spread across Earth like wildfire. News channels, military networks, and social media exploded with outrage. A Xyrelian commander executed a human child in cold blood. The footage from Haven 3 was played on every screen. Billions of humans watched Lillian Carter's scream of grief. Billions saw the lifeless body of a child lying on the ground. And billions demanded justice. In the United Terran Council's war room, Admiral Alexander Drake stood before Earth's top leaders. His piercing gaze swept across the room. "This is no longer a political matter," he said. His voice was steady, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. "The Xyrelian Empire murdered one of our own. They think we are weak. They think we will do nothing. Drake's eyes darkened. They are wrong. The room was silent. Then, President Elena Vasquez spoke. Admiral, what are you suggesting? Drake turned to the massive holographic display of the galaxy. He pointed at a section of space, labeled Zarelian Empire. This is where we strike. Some of the diplomats shifted uncomfortably. One of them, an older man named Ambassador Collins, shook his head. If we attack now, the Galactic Council will call it an act of war, he warned. They might side with the Zarelians. Drake did not blink. Then let them. Collins swallowed hard. You're proposing full-scale war over one child. The Admiral's steel-blue eyes locked onto him. Not just one child. The Empire has been pushing us for years, taxing our colonies, treating us like second-class citizens, and now they think they can execute a human child in broad daylight and get away with it. His voice grew colder. This is not about politics anymore. This is about sending a message. President Vasquez took a deep breath. She had spent her career trying to keep Earth at peace, but now there was no other option. She nodded once. Do it. That was all Admiral Drake needed to hear. Within minutes, orders were transmitted across the solar system. The might of the Terran Defense Fleet was unleashed. Across the solar system, Mars shipyards, the colossal battlecruiser UNS Destiny powered up, its massive engines roaring to life. Luna Command Station, elite pilots raced to their fighters, strapping into their cockpits. Earth's orbital defense grid, stealth frigates and heavy cruisers moved into formation, preparing for hyperspace jumps. The fleet of 300 warships, the largest Earth had ever deployed, was mobilizing. Meanwhile, in Zarelian space, General Vector sat in his personal warship, reviewing the latest reports. The humans had sent angry messages, but there had been no military response. As expected, he thought, humans are weak. They bark, but they do not bite. He smirked, taking a sip of his spiced liquor. The Empire had sent a clear message. Humans were beneath them. Then, a Zarelian officer rushed into the command deck, his face pale. General, we've detected multiple Terran fleets moving toward our borders. Vector nearly dropped his glass. How many? The officer swallowed hard. Hundreds of ships, sir. Battlecruisers, stealth destroyers, planetary assault carriers. Vector's smirk vanished. This wasn't a protest. This was war. And for the first time in his life, fear crept into his bones. The Terran Defense Fleet tore through hyperspace like a storm of vengeance. Over 300 warships, armed with Earth's most advanced weaponry, raced toward Zarelian space. On the bridge of the UNS Destiny, Admiral Alexander Drake stood tall. His steel-blue eyes scanned the massive holographic map in front of him. Time to target, he asked. 17 minutes, his tactical officer replied. Drake nodded. Prepare for combat operations. Full-spectrum warfare. No mercy. Across the fleet, weapons powered up. Railguns hummed with lethal energy. Plasma cannons locked onto coordinates, and stealth destroyers vanished from sensors. The time for diplomacy was over. Meanwhile, in Zarelian space, General Vector stood in his command ship, staring at the dozens of red blips appearing on his tactical display. Impossible, he muttered. The humans would never be this reckless. His second-in-command, Commander Xertal, was pale. Sir, their fleet is larger than expected. They're coming in full force. Vector clenched his fists. Then we will crush them. He turned to his officers. Deploy all forces. Send a transmission to the Council. Tell them to prepare reinforcements. Across the Zarelian fleet, alarms blared. Hundreds of ships scrambled into defensive formations. Fighters launched from carriers, dreadnoughts powered up shields, and plasma cannons swiveled to aim at the approaching human fleet. Then the sky erupted. The battle begins. The first shots were fired from stealth destroyers hidden in the void. Xyrelian ships exploded before they even knew what hit them. Then came the battlecruisers. The UNS Destiny and her sister ships unleashed devastating broadside volleys, their railguns shredding through Xyrelian armor. The Empire's ships fought back, plasma beams lancing through the dark, striking human shields with blinding flashes. Explosions filled the void. A Xyrelian battleship tried to flank the Terran fleet, only to be torn apart by a wave of nuclear torpedoes. On the bridge of his warship, General Vector watched in horror as his fleet was decimated. The humans weren't just fighting. They were outmatching the Empire at every turn. On the ground, Xyrelian High Command in panic. Deep inside the Xyrelian capital world, the Imperial High Council watched the battle unfold on a massive war map. The once arrogant ministers were silent. Their once mighty fleet was falling apart before their eyes. "We must negotiate," one of them stammered. "If this continues..." Boom! A distant explosion shook the building. The humans had begun orbital bombardment. For the first time in Xyrelian history, the Empire was under attack. And Earth was just getting started. The skies above Xyrelian Prime were burning. The Terran fleet, relentless and precise, had broken through enemy defenses. Railgun slugs and plasma lances tore through Xyrelian ships, turning once mighty warships into floating wreckage. Admiral Alexander Drake stood on the bridge of the UNS Destiny, watching as the battle unfolded. "Enemy forces are collapsing," reported his tactical officer. "Their capital defense fleet is down by 70%. Drake's expression was cold. "Begin orbital strike protocol." Below, on Xyrelian Prime, sirens screamed across the cities. The Imperial Palace, once the heart of power in the Empire, shook violently as Terran artillery rained down from orbit. The Xyrelian High Council was in chaos. "This is madness," cried Minister Vextai, clutching the edge of the war table. "Our fleets are being wiped out." General Vector, his face pale, tried to remain calm. "We must retaliate. We still have planetary defenses." The Supreme Chancellor, E. Corvin, turned to his aides. "Activate the planetary defense grid. Target the human ships." The massive anti-orbital cannons around Xyrelian Prime powered up, preparing to fire. Earth's trump card. Before a single shot could be fired, a deep humming noise filled the atmosphere. From the depths of space, a massive shadow emerged, a Terran Titan-class dreadnought. The UNS Behemoth. The Xyrelians had never seen anything like it. The ship was 3 times the size of the Empire's largest battleship, its hull reinforced with Earth's most advanced technology. With a single command, its main cannon fired. A blinding beam of energy streaked down toward the planet, striking the first defense cannon and vaporizing it instantly. The Xyrelian High Council froze in horror. "Impossible," one of them whispered. Within minutes, the entire defense grid was annihilated. Xyrelian Prime was defenseless. The message from Earth. Across the planet, massive holographic projections flickered to life. A stern-faced woman appeared. It was President Evelyn Carter of the United Terran Nations. Her voice echoed across every Xyrelian city. "You murdered a human child in cold blood. You ignored our warnings. And now you will face the consequences." She paused, letting the words sink in. "We are not here for conquest. We are not here for war. We are here for justice." The screen flickered, showing images of human warships preparing another strike. "You have one chance," she continued. "Surrender or face the full wrath of Earth." Silence fell over the Xyrelian High Council. For the first time in their history, they knew fear. The Xyrelian High Council chamber was silent. The holographic image of President Evelyn Carter still flickered in the air, her words hanging over them like a death sentence. "Surrender or face the full wrath of Earth." Chancellor E. Corvin's hands trembled as he stared at the projection. Around him, his advisors whispered in frantic panic, their voices overlapping. "We cannot surrender." General Vector slammed his fist on the table. "The Empire has ruled for centuries. We will not bow to a race of primitive deathworlders. Primitive. Minister vextediest. He gestured toward the sky, where flashes of fire signaled the destruction of their fleet. Look outside, General. Do those ships look primitive to you? Outside, the once mighty Zyrelian capital city was in chaos. Buildings burned, alarms wailed, and terrified civilians flooded the streets, searching for shelter from an enemy that hadn't even set foot on the ground yet. The Terrans did not invade. They punished. The Empire's last defense, in a final act of desperation, Zyrelian forces launched a counterattack. Across the planet, hidden military installations activated their last warships, sending them roaring into the sky. The Imperial Guard, an elite force sworn to defend the High Council, prepared for a last stand. But it was futile. The USS Behemoth, Earth's Titan-class dreadnought, descended closer, casting an enormous shadow over the palace. Admiral Alexander Drake stood on the bridge, watching the Zyrelian ships rise to meet him. "They just don't learn," he muttered. He turned to his weapons officer. "Fire at will." The human fleet unleashed hell. Railgun slugs the size of buildings ripped through Zyrelian battleships, tearing them apart in seconds. Terran fighters weaved through enemy formations, striking with deadly precision. The battle that should have lasted hours was over in minutes. The last stand. In the Imperial Palace, Zyrelian soldiers barricaded the doors, gripping their weapons with shaking hands. The tremors from the orbital bombardment grew stronger, shaking the walls, knocking priceless artifacts to the floor. And then, silence. The soldiers held their breath. A sudden, piercing hum filled the air. The main doors glowed red-hot, metal melting as something cut through it from the outside. Then, with a thunderous crash, the doors collapsed inward, and they entered. Terran shock troopers stormed into the chamber, clad in advanced exosuits, their rifles humming with lethal energy. Their helmets were black, featureless, like specters of vengeance. The Zyrelian guards raised their weapons, but they hesitated. They saw no anger, no mercy in the soldiers facing them. Just cold, unwavering precision. One by one, Zyrelian weapons clattered to the ground. The fight was over before it began. Justice delivered. A team of Terran officers entered last, and at their center was Ambassador Julian Rice, the man who had once pleaded with the Empire to respect human life. He walked past the captured council members, his face unreadable. Finally, he stopped in front of Chancellor E. Corvin. "You were warned," Rice said quietly. "You had a chance to stop this." E. Corvin swallowed hard. We never thought." "That's the problem." Rice cut him off. "You never thought of us as equals. You saw us as nothing." His gaze darkened. "Now you will see what that mistake has cost you." Above them, the Terran fleet hovered in silence, watching as the once mighty Zyrelian Empire crumbled. For the first time in history, the humans stood as the dominant force in the galaxy, and everyone was watching. Back on Earth, the people watched in awe as the news broadcasted the final moments of the Zyrelian collapse. It wasn't just victory. It was proof that no one was beyond humanity's reach. Every news outlet, from the towering skyscrapers of New York to the humble homes in small towns, carried the same message. The Empire's arrogance has been erased. Earth stands unchallenged. Admiral Drake, aboard the UNS Behemoth, stared at the galactic map displayed on his screen. It had been a swift and overwhelming victory, but there was no time to relax. Other empires were already beginning to take notice. The message had spread, but so had the fear. On the outer rim of the galaxy, the Kresh Dominion, a ruthless race known for their brutal tactics, watched the events unfold in stunned silence. For centuries, they had ruled with an iron fist, believing themselves to be invincible. But now, their cold, calculating minds began to recalculate. The Talsori Syndicate, another powerful faction, met in a secretive council room, their leaders whispering in panic. The Zyrelians had been obliterated, and their own spies had reported that humans had a fleet of dozens more ships, each capable of wreaking havoc on a galactic scale. The once confident leaders of the galaxy were suddenly very nervous. Their arrogance, like the Xyrelians, had blinded them to humanity's true strength. The Silent War. Humanity's victory over the Xyrelians had opened a new chapter, but it wasn't a peaceful one. The galactic stage was now filled with whispers. Rumors spread about the true power behind the human forces, and fear began to grow in the hearts of even the most hardened rulers. Earth, once considered a primitive planet, had taken down a galactic empire in days. What could they do to the others? What could they do to anyone who dared cross them? But there was no celebration on Earth. The people did not cheer wildly. The Terran fleet didn't return home with fireworks or medals. They knew what they had just unleashed. The price of victory was a constant vigilance. Julian Reyes stood before the United Nations, addressing the gathered leaders of Earth. His words were clear, cold, and filled with resolve. This was only the beginning. We've made an example of the Xyrelians, but if we do not keep our strength, if we falter, others will rise to challenge us. We are no longer the underdog, and from here on out, we must ensure that Earth remains uncontested. The room fell silent as every leader in the world understood the weight of his words. The war was over, but the tension had only begun. The message to the stars. As the Terran fleet left the Xyrelian system, the UNS Behemoth set its course toward a new destination, the heart of the galaxy. The time for diplomacy, for peace talks, was over. Earth would stand as the new power. The Empire was gone, but now Earth would shape the future. Earth's fleet was unstoppable, and every alien empire, every species, would have to ask themselves one question: what happens when you provoke Earth? The answer was clear now. Nothing survived. The Xyrelian Empire was no more. Its once mighty fleets were scrap metal, its capital world a smoldering ruin. The arrogance that led them to kill an innocent human child had cost them everything. But the war was only the beginning. The Terran fleet, victorious but watchful, now stood at the center of galactic attention. Alien factions, once dismissive of Earth, now whispered in fear. Humanity had been underestimated for too long. Now, their true power had been revealed. On the UNS Behemoth, Admiral Drake studied the war map. The Xyrelians had fallen, but the galaxy was still full of potential threats. "They won't attack us outright," he muttered. "Not after this, but they'll watch, and they'll wait. They'll plan." Beside him, Ambassador Julian Reyes nodded. "And so will we." The Xyrelian War had sent a clear message, but now Earth had a new challenge, holding that power. A galaxy in shock. Across the stars, alien governments scrambled. Some tried to distance themselves from the Xyrelians, afraid of sharing their fate. Others prepared for war, believing that humanity's rise meant their own fall. The Kresh Dominion, brutal and war-hardened, debated their next move. Their leader, a towering creature with crimson scales, growled at his advisors. "The humans act as if they are kings. We have crushed civilizations for less. Do we let this stand?" Silence. Even the Kresh, known for their ruthlessness, hesitated. On the other side of the galaxy, the Talsori Syndicate, a faction known for their manipulation, saw an opportunity. "We will not fight them," one of their shadowy leaders said, his voice a whisper in the darkness. "We will do what we do best: influence, divide. We will turn their allies against them before their fleets grow too powerful." The galaxy was shifting, and Earth stood at the center of it. Earth's future. Back on Earth, the world watched in silence as the news spread. Humanity had done what no one thought possible. They had broken an empire. But with victory came questions. Would Earth now become an empire itself? Would they seek conquest or peace through power? At the United Nations headquarters, leaders from every human nation gathered. Some demanded an expansion of the fleet, others called for caution. But one thing was certain: Humanity would never be weak again. Julian Reyes stood before them, his expression calm but resolute. "The galaxy will test us again," he said. "They will probe for weakness. They will try to manipulate us. But Earth will not bow. We will not be divided." The Zarelians learned the cost of arrogance. If others forget, we will remind them. A thunderous applause filled the hall. Humanity had changed. They were no longer the forgotten species on the edge of the galaxy. They were now a power to be reckoned with. The war was over, but Earth's true battle had just begun. The stars belonged to humanity now.